Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Facts channel. I'm so glad you found your way here. Maybe you had a long day, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes falling asleep to treetop mysteries rather than counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey is for you. Let your mind relax, your breathing slow, and your body grow light as morning mist rising through leaves. Because tonight, we're exploring the Rainforest Canopy, that vast green ceiling where most of the forest's life unfolds in perpetual twilight. We'll drift from the layers of leaves that filter sunlight to the creatures that never touch the ground, discovering how an entire world exists 100 feet above the forest floor. Some of what you hear tonight may surprise you, or at least spark curiosity as you drift off. Before we begin, if this helps you unwind, consider liking and subscribing. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin. The Rainforest Canopy forms a continuous blanket of leaves and branches that stretches between treetops at heights ranging from 60 to 130 feet above the ground, creating a living ceiling that intercepts most of the sunlight before it reaches the forest floor below. This upper layer contains the crowns of the tallest trees, their branches interlocking and overlapping to form a dense network that appears from above as an unbroken green sea, waves frozen in chlorophyll and cellulose. The canopy is not uniform but rather consists of multiple sublayers, each with slightly different light levels and microclimates, creating a vertical gradient of conditions that different species exploit in different ways. The very top of the canopy, called the emergent layer, consists of the tallest individual trees whose crowns rise above the general canopy level. These giants, enduring full sun exposure and strong winds that the lower canopy is sheltered from. Below the main canopy lies the understory, a dimmer realm where light arrives filtered through countless leaves, where plants adapted to shade create another layer of complexity. The canopy itself hosts more biodiversity than any other forest layer, with estimates suggesting that over half of all terrestrial plant and animal species live in rainforest canopies, making these elevated habitats among the most species-rich environments on Earth. The leaves form a vast solar collector, billions of individual surfaces capturing photons and converting light energy into the chemical bonds that fuel nearly all life in the forest below. The canopy serving as the forest's engine, its primary producer, its fundamental source of energy and structure. The temperature in the rainforest canopy differs significantly from conditions on the forest floor, with the upper canopy experiencing greater temperature fluctuations throughout the day as it receives direct sunlight during the day and radiates heat to the sky at night. During midday, canopy temperatures can reach nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the leaves absorbing solar radiation and heating the air around them, creating a warm zone that contrasts with the cooler, more stable temperatures found in the shaded understory below. At night, the canopy cools through radiative heat loss, temperatures dropping by 20 or 30 degrees, though rarely reaching the extremes that would occur without the moderating influence of high humidity and the thermal mass of the forest itself. This daily temperature cycle creates a rhythm that influences when canopy animals are active, many species timing their activities to avoid the hottest midday hours, becoming more active during dawn and dusk, when temperatures moderate and when the angle of sunlight creates different conditions for visibility and foraging. The humidity in the canopy also varies, generally being lower than near the ground, where moisture accumulates and evaporation rates are reduced by shade. Though even in the canopy, humidity rarely drops below levels that would stress the moisture-dependent organisms living there. These microclimatic variations create numerous ecological niches, temperature and humidity gradients, allowing species to specialize in particular zones within the vertical structure, the canopy becoming not a single habitat, but a collection of overlapping habitats, stacked vertically through space. The leaves in the rainforest canopy come in countless shapes and sizes, though many share certain features that represent adaptations to the high light, high temperature conditions found at the top of the forest. Many canopy leaves have thick, waxy cuticles that reduce water loss through evaporation, essential in an environment where, despite high rainfall, plants can experience water stress during hot, sunny days when transpiration rates exceed water uptake. Some leaves are small and thick, minimizing surface area relative to volume, reducing both water loss and the risk of overheating, while others are large but divided into smaller leaflets that allow air to flow between them, cooling the leaves through convection. The famous drip tips that characterize many tropical leaves, pointed extensions at the leaf tip that allow water to drain quickly, help prevent fungal growth, and reduce the weight of water accumulating on leaves during heavy rains. Leaf arrangement varies with position in the canopy. Leaves in the sunny upper canopy, often being smaller and more densely packed than those in the shaded lower canopy. This vertical variation in leaf characteristics, reflecting optimization for different light regimes. The green color that dominates our image of rainforests comes from chlorophyll, the pigment that captures light energy for photosynthesis, though many canopy leaves also contain red and yellow pigments that protect against excessive light, or that become visible when chlorophyll breaks down during leaf senescence. The collective surface area of all these leaves is enormous, with some estimates suggesting that rainforest canopies contain over 7 square miles of leaf surface for every square mile of ground, layer upon layer of photosynthetic tissue stacked through the vertical dimension. The forest maximizing its ability to capture light by spreading leaves through three-dimensional space. Epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants without taking nutrients from them, cover the branches of canopy trees in such abundance that their combined weight can exceed the weight of all the leaves on the supporting tree. These plants, which include orchids, bromeliads, ferns, and mosses, use tree branches as platforms that give them access to light without requiring them to invest resources in growing their own tall trunks. The relationship is commensal rather than parasitic, the epiphyte gaining support while the tree is neither significantly helped nor harmed, though very heavy epiphyte loads can break branches and may slightly reduce the host tree's photosynthesis by shading some of its leaves. Epiphytes obtain nutrients from rain washing over the canopy, from dust and debris that accumulates among their roots, and from the decomposition of dead leaves and bark from the host tree, creating their own small ecosystems perched high above the ground. Some bromeliads hold water in the cup, formed by their overlapping leaves, creating miniature ponds 50 feet above the forest floor. These phytotelmata hosting their own communities of insects, tadpoles, and microorganisms. Entire aquatic ecosystems, existing in volumes smaller than a bathtub. The roots of epiphytes often contain specialized fungi that help them absorb nutrients, mycorrhizal relationships, allowing these plants to survive in locations where soil is absent and nutrients arrive in dilute form through rain and airborne particles. The canopy becomes a garden suspended in air, plants growing on plants, creating layers of vegetation that multiply the habitat complexity beyond what the tree structure alone would provide, each branch potentially supporting dozens of epiphyte species, each epiphyte potentially hosting numerous dependent organisms. The movement of water through the rainforest canopy involves complex pathways as rain falls through layers of leaves, some water being intercepted by leaf surfaces, some running down branches to the trunk, and some dripping from leaf to leaf in a cascade that eventually reaches the ground. This canopy interception means that during light rains, little water may reach the forest floor, the canopy absorbing moisture that evaporates back to the atmosphere before completing the journey downward, effectively short-circuiting the water cycle. During heavy rains, the canopy becomes saturated and begins shedding water in streams and drips. The patterns of water flow, influenced by leaf shapes, branch angles, and the presence of epiphytes that absorb water like sponges before releasing it gradually. The water running down tree trunks, called stem flow, can be significant, carrying dissolved nutrients leached from leaves and bark, delivering concentrated nutrients to the soil around the tree base. Some canopy animals depend on the water collected in epiphyte cups or in tree holes, these elevated water sources providing drinking opportunities without requiring trips to ground level where predators may wait. The fog and mist that forms in rainforest canopies, particularly in cloud forests, where humidity remains near saturation constantly, represents water that condenses from the air itself, adding moisture to the forest without falling as rain. The trees essentially combing water from passing clouds. Water flows through the canopy in all directions, falling, rising as vapor, condensing on leaves, running down bark, held in bromeliad cups. Each pathway contributing to the forest's hydrology, the canopy mediating how water moves between sky and soil. The structural complexity of the rainforest canopy creates countless microhabitats, each branch fork and hollow, potentially serving as home for animals that rarely or never descend to the forest floor. These three-dimensional structures provide far more living space than would exist if the forest were simply a flat layer of leaves. The branching architecture, multiplying available habitat by creating surfaces and spaces at many different heights and orientations. Some animals occupy territories measured vertically rather than horizontally. A sloth's home range, perhaps encompassing the crown of a single tree, its world bounded by the limits of interconnected branches it can reach without descending to the dangerous ground. The tangles created where multiple trees' branches interlock form particularly complex habitats. These crown shyness gaps and overlapping zones, providing opportunities for animals to move between trees, creating networks of aerial highways through the canopy. Dead branches within living trees create perches and nest sites, while living branches provide food in the form of leaves, flowers, and fruits, the same structures serving multiple functions. The variation in branch thickness, from massive primary branches capable of supporting large animals to tiny twigs that only insects can traverse, creates a size-structured environment where species sort themselves by body size and locomotory capabilities. Some animals build structures within this existing framework, constructing nests or dens that add another layer of architectural complexity, their creations becoming microhabitats within the larger habitat. The canopy's three-dimensional maze of branches and leaves contains more edges, more interfaces between different conditions than could exist in a simpler two-dimensional landscape, these edges creating opportunities for species that specialize in transitions and boundaries. Light in the rainforest canopy arrives in a shifting mosaic of sunflecks and shade, the pattern changing throughout the day as the sun moves across the sky and as wind moves branches and leaves. This dynamic light environment means that any given leaf experiences constantly varying illumination, periods of full sun alternating with periods of shade, the plant adjusting its photosynthetic machinery to cope with these fluctuations. The sunflecks that penetrate gaps in the upper canopy, brief moments of direct sunlight that sweep across lower canopy leaves, provide opportunities for enhanced photosynthesis, but also pose risks of photoinhibition if leaves adapted to shade receive more light than they can process safely. Plants in the lower canopy often have leaves with pigments that protect against sudden light exposure, anthocyanins and other compounds absorbing excess light energy before it can damage the photosynthetic apparatus. The overall light level decreases with depth into the canopy, with less than 5% of the light reaching the top of the canopy penetrating to the forest floor. This dramatic attenuation, resulting from absorption and scattering by the countless leaves, each photon must pass through or be absorbed by. The color of light also changes with depth, green light penetrating slightly better than other wavelengths because chlorophyll absorbs blue and red light preferentially, leaving green light to continue downward, creating the green-tinted twilight characteristic of forest understories. Light becomes currency in the canopy economy, the fundamental limiting resource that plants compete for through growing tall, spreading wide, or finding ways to tolerate shade. Every aspect of canopy structure ultimately shaped by the imperative to capture photons. The wind regime in the rainforest canopy differs dramatically from conditions at ground level, with the upper canopy experiencing significant air movement, while the understory remains relatively calm. The canopy acts as a roughness layer, slowing wind through friction with leaves and branches, converting the wind's kinetic energy into turbulence that mixes the air within and below the canopy. This mixing brings fresh carbon dioxide to leaves for photosynthesis, removes excess heat and water vapor, and helps distribute the chemical signals that plants release when damaged by herbivores, allowing neighboring plants to increase their defenses preemptively. The physical force of wind shapes canopy trees, with those in exposed positions developing shorter, stockier trunks and smaller, tougher leaves than trees sheltered within the forest. These growth forms representing phenotypic responses to mechanical stress. Storms bring extreme wind events that can topple emergent trees or break large branches, creating gaps in the canopy that flood the lower layers with light, and initiate succession sequences as pioneer species colonize the newly opened space. Some canopy animals use wind as transportation, gliding from tree to tree rather than climbing down and back up. The moving air providing a medium for controlled descent. The wind carries sounds and scents through the canopy, acoustic and chemical signals propagating horizontally through the forest crown, allowing communication over distances that would require much more energy if individuals had to move through the dense, three-dimensional structure. Wind becomes another dimension of the canopy environment, invisible but influential, shaping structure, transporting materials and information, connecting distant parts of the forest through the movement of air. The chemistry of the rainforest canopy includes an astonishing diversity of compounds produced by plants for defense, signaling, and competition, making the canopy a chemical wonderland where every leaf potentially contains dozens of unique molecules. These secondary metabolites, compounds not directly involved in growth and reproduction, but serving ecological functions, include alkaloids that deter herbivores, terpenes that attract pollinators, phenolics that protect against ultraviolet radiation, and countless other substances whose functions we are still discovering. The diversity of plant secondary compounds in rainforests exceeds that of any other ecosystem, likely reflecting the intense evolutionary arms race between plants and the numerous herbivorous insects that feed on them, each plant species developing its own chemical defenses, while insects evolve countermeasures and detoxification mechanisms. Some of these compounds have proven valuable to humans, with many medications derived from rainforest plants, though the vast majority of canopy plant species have never been chemically analyzed, representing a largely unexplored molecular library that may contain solutions to diseases or other challenges. The canopy air contains volatile organic compounds released by plants. These molecules reacting with other atmospheric constituents to form particles that influence cloud formation and regional climate, the forest's chemistry extending beyond individual leaves to affect atmospheric processes. Walking through the canopy would involve experiencing smells that have no names, chemical signatures of species that release their aromatic fingerprints into the humid air, creating an olfactory landscape as complex as the visual landscape of leaves and branches. The nutrients in the rainforest canopy cycle primarily between living plants, decomposers, and the organisms that consume plants, with surprisingly little nutrient movement to the soil below. This tight nutrient cycling occurs because most decomposition happens in the canopy itself, where dead leaves are colonized by fungi and bacteria, while still attached to trees or trapped in epiphyte masses, the released nutrients being absorbed by the dense network of roots and fungal hyphae that permeate canopy organic matter. The soil in many tropical rainforests is actually quite nutrient poor, having been leached by heavy rainfall over geological timescales. The richness of the forest, existing despite soil poverty rather than because of soil fertility, nutrients retained in the living biomass rather than stored in soil reserves. This means that when rainforests are cleared, the land proves disappointingly unproductive for agriculture. After just a few years, the nutrients being lost to erosion and leaching. Once the vegetation that retained them is removed, the apparent fertility having been an illusion created by efficient recycling rather than actual nutrient abundance. The canopy roots that grow along branches and within epiphyte mats, sometimes called aerial roots, though they are architecturally similar to soil roots, capture nutrients with remarkable efficiency, intercepting nutrients before they have a chance to leach away. The mycorrhizal fungi, associated with canopy plant roots, form networks that transfer nutrients between plants, creating a community-level nutrient distribution system that ensures efficient use of scarce resources, the fungi receiving carbon from plants, while providing plants with nutrients extracted from decomposing organic matter. Nutrients flow through the canopy in a complex web of exchanges. Capture, release, and recapture. The efficiency of these processes, allowing diverse and productive ecosystems to exist on fundamentally nutrient-poor substrates. The age structure of rainforest canopy trees creates a temporal dimension to forest ecology, with individual trees potentially living for centuries, their long lifespans, meaning that the forest we see today reflects events and conditions from decades or centuries in the past. Some emergent trees may be 500 years old or more, these ancient individuals having germinated before European colonization of the Americas, or during the height of the Renaissance in Europe, living links to forests that existed before widespread human alteration of the landscape. The longevity of canopy trees has implications for forest recovery after disturbance, as restoring the structural complexity of an old-growth canopy requires not just planting trees, but waiting centuries for them to reach their full size, and for the complex communities of epiphytes, animals, and microorganisms to re-establish. The death of a large canopy tree creates an effect that propagates through the forest for decades, the gap allowing light to reach the understory and initiating succession as fast-growing pioneer species colonize the opening. These pioneers eventually being replaced by shade-tolerant species that grow slowly beneath the pioneers, until they emerge into the canopy themselves. The growth rings in tropical trees are often less distinct than in temperate trees, because the seasonal climate variations that create clear rings in temperate regions are absent or subtle in the tropics, making age determination challenging and requiring specialized techniques. The trees grow slowly in the dim understory, patiently adding wood while waiting for a gap to open, then accelerating their growth when light becomes available. Their growth history, recorded in subtle variations in wood density, that reveal the changing conditions they experienced. Time in the canopy moves slowly, measured in seasons that blend into years that accumulate into centuries. The patient architecture of the forest emerging from processes that unfold across timescales beyond human perception. The soundscape of the rainforest canopy contains layers of acoustic communication, from the high-frequency calls of insects to the lower-frequency vocalizations of birds and primates, creating a sonic environment as complex as the visual structure. Dawn and dusk bring choruses where many species vocalize simultaneously, their calls overlapping but occupying different frequency ranges that allow multiple species to communicate without excessive interference, a form of acoustic niche partitioning. The physical structure of the canopy influences sound propagation, with sound waves scattering off leaves and branches, being absorbed by vegetation, and refracting due to temperature gradients. These acoustic properties, creating communication challenges that species have adapted to through evolving calls with characteristics suited to transmission through dense foliage. High-frequency sounds, which carry information with high fidelity but attenuate quickly with distance, are used for communication over short ranges, while lower frequencies, which travel farther but carry less information, serve for long-distance communication. Some animals time their calls to avoid overlap with background noise from wind or rain, or they increase calling rates or amplitudes during noisy conditions. Behavioral flexibility, allowing communication despite variable acoustic conditions. The canopy contains acoustic refuges where particular species' calls propagate well, while other species' calls are masked. These acoustic microhabitats, perhaps influencing where animals establish territories or choose display sites, Listening to the canopy means hearing a three-dimensional soundscape, where calls come from specific locations in the vertical structure, a spatial arrangement of sound sources that creates a richer acoustic environment than the two-dimensional soundscapes of open habitats. The layering of sounds through space, matching the layering of physical structure through the forest. The flowers in the rainforest canopy appear in remarkable diversity, their colors, shapes, and scents, reflecting the diversity of pollinators that visit them, from tiny flies to large birds and bats. Some canopy trees produce their flowers directly on the trunk or large branches, a phenomenon called cauliflory, positioning flowers where they are accessible to pollinators that cannot easily navigate through dense foliage, or where wind can carry pollen without obstruction by leaves. Other trees produce flowers at branch tips where they are visible from a distance, advertising their presence through bright colors or by blooming en masse, creating floral displays that attract pollinators from across the forest. The timing of flowering varies among species, some flowering seasonally in response to day length or rainfall patterns, others flowering continuously, and still others flowering irregularly, perhaps in response to environmental triggers that humans have not yet identified. This temporal diversity in flowering means that at any given time, some canopy tree species are in flower, ensuring that pollinators have food resources year-round and that competition for pollinators is spread across time rather than all species competing simultaneously. Night-blooming flowers attract bats and moths, their pale colors visible in darkness, and their strong scents guiding pollinators to them when visual cues are limited. The flowers exist briefly, often lasting only days before withering, their ephemeral beauty serving specific reproductive purposes rather than persisting for aesthetic appreciation, the canopy's floral display constantly changing as species come into and out of bloom, a temporal mosaic of reproductive opportunities. The fruits that develop from canopy flowers contain seeds, packaged with nutritious flesh, that attracts animals. These seed dispersers, consuming the fruit, and either spitting out the seeds or passing them through their digestive systems intact, depositing them away from the parent tree. This mutualistic relationship benefits both plant and animal, the plant achieving seed dispersal while the animal receives nutrition, though the relationship can be complex, as animals may destroy seeds rather than dispersing them, or may drop seeds beneath the parent, where they have poor survival prospects. Large fruits high in the canopy must either be light enough for birds to carry or must be eaten by arboreal mammals that rarely descend to the ground, as fruits that simply fall would crash through the canopy and shatter on the forest floor. Some canopy trees produce crops of fruit that ripen synchronously, overwhelming seed predators with more seeds than they can consume, ensuring that some seeds survive through sheer abundance, even though individual seeds face high predation risk. The chemical composition of fruits influences which animals eat them, with different species preferring fruits of different sugar content, fat content, and secondary compound profiles. This chemical diversity, allowing fruit resources to be partitioned among disperser species. The ripening of fruits adds another temporal dimension to canopy ecology. Pulses of ripe fruit, attracting aggregations of frugivores, these gatherings creating opportunities for social interaction, and also increasing predation risk as predators learn to associate fruiting trees with the presence of prey. The fruits hang from branches like offerings, packages of nutrition wrapped in colors that signal ripeness, their presence transforming trees into banquet halls where animals gather to feed, and in doing so participate in the tree's reproductive strategy. The bark of canopy trees serves multiple functions, beyond simply protecting the living tissues beneath it, with many species producing bark that contains toxic or deterrent compounds, that hosts symbiotic organisms, or that has physical features influencing water movement or epiphyte colonization. Smooth bark sheds epiphytes and makes climbing difficult for some animals, while rough bark provides purchase for climbing and offers crevices where epiphyte seeds can lodge and germinate. Some bark continuously peels or flakes, shedding epiphytes and any herbivorous insects trying to burrow into the tree. this dynamic outer surface, maintaining itself through constant renewal. The color and texture of bark varies dramatically among species, from smooth and pale to rough and dark, these differences sometimes helping with tree identification when leaves are too high to see clearly. Bark thickness influences vulnerability to fire. Though fires are relatively rare in wet tropical forests, the high humidity and lack of dry fuel limiting fire spread under normal conditions. The chemicals in bark can include tannins, alkaloids, and other compounds that deter herbivores or that prevent fungal and bacterial infections, the bark serving as chemical defense as well as physical barrier. As trees grow, their bark must expand to accommodate the increasing circumference, different species achieving this through different mechanisms, some developing deep fissures as the bark splits and new tissue fills the gaps, others maintaining smooth bark through elastic properties that allow stretching without splitting. The bark wraps each trunk in its own unique texture and pattern, fingerprints written in cellulose and lignin, the outer surface that defines the tree's presence in the three-dimensional space of the canopy. The strangler figs that begin life as epiphytes eventually develop roots that descend to the soil. These roots thickening and fusing to form a lattice around the host tree's trunk, creating a botanical embrace that gives these plants their name. The fig begins as a seed deposited in the canopy by a bird or bat, germinating on a branch and sending roots downward while growing upward toward the light, essentially working in both directions simultaneously. As the descending roots reach the soil and begin absorbing water and nutrients, the fig's growth accelerates, its canopy expanding to compete with the host tree for light. The root lattice around the host trunk may eventually contribute to the host's death, though this happens slowly over decades, and the exact mechanisms remain debated, with some researchers suggesting the strangler fig outcompetes the host for light, rather than mechanically strangling it. Once the host tree dies and decomposes, the fig's root lattice remains, creating a hollow structure that can stand independently, these hollow strangler figs providing roosting sites for bats and nesting sites for birds. Their unusual architecture creating habitats that would not exist otherwise. The relationship between fig and host demonstrates that categories like mutualism and parasitism exist on a continuum, rather than as distinct states, the outcome depending on perspective and on which stage of the relationship is considered. The strangler fig writes its story in living architecture, beginning in the canopy and eventually connecting sky to soil, transforming from dependent epiphyte to dominant tree through a slow process that spans decades. The lianas that drape through rainforest canopies, woody vines that root in the soil but climb into the treetops, use trees as ladders to reach light without investing resources in building self-supporting trunks. These vines can grow hundreds of feet long, connecting multiple trees and creating a network of flexible cables through the canopy, allowing some animals to move between trees without descending to the ground. The presence of lianas influences tree growth and survival, the vines competing with trees for light and potentially pulling down branches or even entire trees when the liana's weight becomes excessive. Some trees appear to have evolved defenses against lianas, including smooth bark that prevents vine attachment, or rapidly growing branches that break free from vine entanglement. These anti-liana traits perhaps spreading through natural selection in forests, where vine abundance is high. The structural role of lianas in the canopy goes beyond simply using trees for support, as their flexible stems absorb energy during storms, potentially reducing the force transmitted to the tree and preventing breakage, though they also increase wind resistance and can cause damage by pulling on branches. The liana's growth strategy represents an alternative solution to the problem of reaching the canopy, one that trades structural independence for resource efficiency, the vine remaining dependent on trees, but achieving reproductive success through its ability to reach light without the enormous investment required to build a tall trunk. The lianas loop and twist through the canopy like serpents frozen in place, organic ropes connecting separate structures into an integrated network, their presence adding connectivity to what would otherwise be isolated tree crowns. The mycorrhizal networks that connect plant roots underground also exist in the canopy, where fungal hyphae grow through the organic matter that accumulates on branches and within epiphyte masses, linking the roots of different epiphyte species and possibly connecting epiphytes to the host tree's root system. These fungal networks allow nutrient transfer between plants. The direction of transfer, depending on concentration gradients and on the relative demands of different partners, creating a commonwealth of nutrient sharing that increases the efficiency of resource use. The fungi receive carbon from plants in exchange for providing nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen that might otherwise be scarce. This exchange forming one of the fundamental mutualisms underlying forest productivity. Some fungi are generalists that associate with many plant species, while others are specialists that associate with only one or a few closely related species. This variation in partnership breadth, creating different levels of connectivity in the mycorrhizal network. The chemical signaling between plants and fungi involves complex molecular conversations. Plants releasing compounds that attract compatible fungi. Fungi releasing signals that trigger root growth or other plant responses. The partnership being negotiated through chemistry rather than through active choice. The mycorrhizal network extends the functional reach of plant roots far beyond what root systems alone could achieve. The fungi effectively acting as extensions of the root system, exploring spaces too small for roots and connecting to resources that roots could not access. These underground networks have aerial counterparts in the canopy. The same principles of nutrient exchange and mutualistic partnership operating among branches as operate in soil, the forest connected at multiple levels through fungal bridges that unite the living community. The canopy gap dynamics that follow the death of large trees create spatial and temporal heterogeneity in forest structure. With gaps of different sizes and ages existing simultaneously across the landscape, each gap representing a different stage in the process of canopy recovery. Small gaps, created by the loss of individual branches or small trees, close quickly as adjacent trees expand their crowns into the newly available space, these minor disturbances being healed within years. Large gaps, formed when massive emergent trees fall, may remain open for decades, as succession proceeds through pioneer species before shade-tolerant species eventually fill the canopy. These major disturbances, resetting local succession and creating patches of younger forest within the older matrix. The environmental conditions in gaps differ dramatically from conditions under intact canopy, with higher light levels, higher temperatures, lower humidity, and different soil conditions, influencing which species can colonize and succeed in gaps. Some plant species specialize in gap colonization, producing abundant small seeds that disperse widely and germinate only when exposed to high light levels. These pioneers, growing rapidly to overtop competitors, but having relatively short lifespans, as they are eventually overtopped by slower growing but longer-lived species. Animals respond to gap creation as well, with different species preferring gap habitats versus mature forest habitats, the diversity of gap sizes and ages creating a corresponding diversity of animal communities across the landscape. The canopy's structure at any moment reflects the accumulated history of tree falls and regrowth, patterns written in variations of tree height and species composition, each patch telling a story of disturbance and recovery. The forest a living palimpsest where the present overlies past events imperfectly erased. The photosynthetic efficiency of rainforest canopy leaves varies with their position in the canopy, with sun leaves at the top having different physiological characteristics than shade leaves in the lower canopy, these differences representing adaptations to the dramatically different light environments they experience. Sun leaves typically contain more chlorophyll per unit area, have thicker tissues with more layers of photosynthetic cells, and possess higher concentrations of protective pigments that dissipate excess light energy as heat before it can damage the photosynthetic machinery. Shade leaves, conversely, are often thinner, with larger surface areas relative to their thickness, maximizing light capture in the dim conditions of the lower canopy, while minimizing the costs of building and maintaining leaf tissue. The same tree may produce different leaf types, depending on position, demonstrating phenotypic plasticity, where the tree adjusts its leaf characteristics to match local light conditions, rather than producing identical leaves throughout its crown. This plasticity allows trees to optimize photosynthesis across the vertical gradient of light availability, extracting energy efficiently from both the bright conditions at the top and the dim conditions deeper within the crown. The biochemistry of photosynthesis also varies, with sun leaves having higher concentrations of the enzymes involved in processing light energy, while shade leaves may have proportionally more of the enzymes involved in fixing carbon dioxide. The balance between different components of photosynthesis shifting to match the primary limitations imposed by each light environment. The canopy becomes a laboratory of photosynthetic variation, each leaf fine-tuned to its specific location, the tree as a whole, integrating these differently adapted leaves into a coherent strategy for energy capture across the complex light environment it inhabits. The aerial roots that some canopy plants produce descend from branches toward the soil, these roots serving both as nutrient and water uptake structures and as additional structural support once they reach the ground and thicken into pillar-like props. Some fig species produce such roots prolifically. A single tree eventually supported by hundreds of descending roots that create a forest of pillars surrounding the original trunk, this architectural form allowing the tree to expand its canopy far beyond what a single trunk could support. The roots grow slowly downward, sometimes taking years to traverse the distance from canopy to soil, their growth influenced by gravity and by moisture gradients, the roots following the path toward water. Before reaching the soil, these dangling roots may absorb water and nutrients from rain and from the humid air itself, functioning as aerial organs before becoming conventional soil roots. Some animals use these hanging roots as climbing roots, the roots providing connections between canopy and ground that are easier to navigate than the rough bark of vertical trunks. The development of aerial roots represents an architectural innovation that allows trees to expand their resource capture in both directions, extending upward into the light while simultaneously extending downward into the soil. The vertical dimension exploited from both ends simultaneously. These roots hang through the canopy like natural ropes, organic bridges between earth and sky, their presence adding another element to the three-dimensional complexity that characterizes rainforest structure. The seasonality in tropical rainforests is often subtle compared to temperate regions, lacking the dramatic temperature changes that mark seasonal transitions in higher latitudes. But many tropical forests show distinct wet and dry seasons that influence plant and animal phenology. The timing of leaf flush, flowering, and fruiting often corresponds to rainfall patterns, with many trees producing new leaves at the onset of the wet season, when water is abundant and photosynthetic production can proceed without water stress. Some trees drop their leaves during the dry season, despite being in tropical regions that remain warm year-round. This deciduous habit representing a strategy to reduce water loss during periods when soil moisture is limited. The synchronization of flowering and fruiting among individuals of the same species, sometimes occurring over just a few weeks despite the year-round growing season, may reflect responses to environmental cues like day length or rainfall, though the proximate triggers for reproductive phenology remain poorly understood for many tropical species. Animals time their reproduction to coincide with peak food availability, births occurring when fruit or flowers are abundant, ensuring that mothers have adequate nutrition for lactation and that young animals find sufficient food as they begin feeding independently. The subtle seasonality of tropical forests creates temporal structure that is less obvious to human observers than the dramatic seasons of temperate zones, but that nonetheless shapes ecological patterns and evolutionary adaptations, the forest operating on rhythms that require years of observation to fully appreciate. Patterns that emerge only when data from many years are compiled and compared. The decomposition of organic matter in the rainforest canopy proceeds rapidly due to warm temperatures and high humidity. with dead leaves being colonized by fungi and bacteria within hours of falling. These decomposers, breaking down the complex organic molecules into simpler forms that can be recycled. The speed of decomposition means that nutrients are released quickly, available for reabsorption before they can be leached away by rain. This rapid cycling contributing to the nutrient retention that allows forests to thrive on nutrient-poor soils. Specialized decomposer organisms occupy different niches in the decomposition process, with some species initiating breakdown by penetrating the leaf's waxy cuticle, others consuming the partially decomposed tissues, and still others processing the final stages of decay. This succession of decomposer species ensuring thorough breakdown of organic matter. Insects participate in decomposition by fragmenting leaves into smaller pieces that offer more surface area for microbial colonization, their chewing and grinding, accelerating the overall process by making organic matter more accessible to fungi and bacteria. The decomposition rate varies with the chemical composition of plant tissues, with leaves high in lignin or secondary compounds decomposing more slowly than leaves with simpler chemical compositions. This variation creating a hierarchy of decomposition rates that influences which plant parts contribute most readily to nutrient cycling. The constant rain of dead leaves and other organic matter from the canopy, combined with rapid decomposition, means that nutrients cycle quickly through the system, being repeatedly taken up by plants, incorporated into biomass, released through decomposition, and taken up again. The forest, maintaining productivity through efficient recycling rather than through abundant nutrient stocks. The animal biomass in the rainforest canopy exceeds that of all other forest layers combined, with insects alone accounting for a substantial fraction of this biomass, their small individual size obscuring their collective importance in canopy ecology. Ants are particularly abundant, some canopy trees hosting multiple ant colonies in different parts of their crowns, these ants defending the tree against herbivorous insects in exchange for nest sites or for food provided by the tree in the form of extrafloral nectaries or food bodies. The biomass of vertebrates in the canopy, while smaller than insect biomass, nonetheless represents a significant fraction of the forest's animal life, with birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians all having species that rarely or never descend from the trees. The vertical distribution of animal biomass reflects the distribution of resources, with the greatest concentrations occurring where food is most abundant, typically in the middle to upper canopy, where leaves, flowers, and fruits are produced. Some animals move vertically through the canopy in daily or seasonal migrations, following food resources as they become available at different heights, these vertical migrations creating temporal variation in the animal community at any given height. The concentration of animal life in the canopy creates intense competition and predation pressure, driving the evolution of diverse strategies for obtaining food and avoiding being eaten. The canopy becoming an arena where ecological interactions play out with an intensity, reflecting the density of life, compressed into this elevated habitat. The biomass moves through the canopy in constant flux, animals feeding and being fed upon, reproducing and dying, their collective activity representing energy flowing through the food web, the canopy serving as the primary theater where this flow occurs. The color patterns visible in the rainforest canopy include not just the dominant green of chlorophyll, but flashes of brighter colors from flowers, fruits, and animals, these punctuation marks of color serving various functions from advertising to camouflage. Red and orange fruits stand out against green foliage, attracting frugivores whose color vision allows them to detect these signals. The contrast between fruit and leaf colors, maximizing the visibility of ripe fruit to desired dispersers. Some leaves produce red pigments when young, these anthocyanins potentially protecting the developing leaf from excessive light or from herbivores. The red coloration, serving as warning that the leaf contains high concentrations of defensive compounds. The iridescent blues and greens of some butterflies and birds result from structural color rather than pigments. Microscopic structures on feathers or wing scales, scattering light in ways that produce pure, intense colors that shimmer as viewing angles change. These structural colors can be more visible in the filtered light of the canopy than pigment-based colors, making them effective signals in an environment where light quality differs from full sun conditions. The mottled patterns on some animals' coats or feathers break up their outline when viewed against the complex background of leaves and branches, disruptive coloration, making the animal harder to detect, despite not matching any particular background color. The canopy presents a visual environment where colors serve as signals and as camouflage, where the interplay of light and pigment creates patterns that influence survival and reproduction. The colors we perceive representing solutions to problems of visibility, communication, and predator avoidance. The vertical stratification of insect communities in the rainforest canopy reflects specialization on different plant parts and on different microhabitats, with leaf-feeding insects concentrated where young, nutritious leaves are produced, flower visitors aggregating where flowers bloom, and wood-boring insects attacking dead branches and stressed trees. The diversity of insects in canopy samples astonishes researchers, with a single tree potentially hosting thousands of insect species, many of them specialists, that feed on only that tree species, or even on specific parts of that tree. This high diversity reflects both the diversity of plant species and the narrow host ranges, typical of tropical insects, each plant species potentially supporting its own specialized insect fauna. The temporal patterns of insect abundance vary with plant phenology. Insects tracking the production of new leaves or the flowering of particular tree species, their populations rising and falling in response to resource availability. Predatory insects hunt among the vegetation, spiders building webs to intercept flying insects, wasps hunting caterpillars to provision their nests, mantises ambushing prey from camouflaged perches, the canopy containing predator communities as diverse as the herbivores they consume. The insects pollinate flowers, disperse fungi, recycle nutrients through their feeding and waste production, and serve as food for vertebrate insectivores, their ecological roles extending far beyond their individual small size might suggest. The insect life of the canopy remains largely unknown, with most species undescribed by science, their existence acknowledged statistically through sampling that consistently yields new species, but their natural history remaining unstudied, the canopy holding countless secrets in the lives of tiny creatures that humans rarely see or study. The structural engineering of rainforest canopy trees must balance competing demands, with trunks needing sufficient strength to support the mass of the crown and to resist wind forces, while also needing to transport water from roots to leaves, potentially 100 feet above the soil. The vascular tissue that conducts water consists of xylem vessels, narrow tubes through which water moves under tension generated by evaporation from leaves, the entire water column from roots to leaves held together by cohesive forces between water molecules. This system works under enormous tension, with the water column under negative pressure that would cause most fluids to cavitate and break, only water's special properties allowing trees to pull water to such heights against gravity and friction. The diameter of xylem vessels represents a trade-off between hydraulic efficiency, with wider vessels conducting water more easily, and safety, with narrower vessels being less vulnerable to cavitation and breakage of the water column. Tropical trees often have relatively narrow vessels compared to temperate trees, prioritizing safety over efficiency. In an environment where water stress can occur despite high annual rainfall, dry season conditions or midday heat, causing water deficits that threaten hydraulic function, the wood must also resist compression from the weight of the crown, tension from wind loading, and torsion from asymmetric crown growth. This mechanical complexity requiring sophisticated internal architecture that varies through the trunk's radius and height. The tree stands as a solution to engineering problems, its structure representing a compromise among competing functional demands, every dimension and proportion reflecting optimization through natural selection for structures that perform adequately across the range of conditions the tree encounters during its lifetime. The epiphyly, Organisms that grow on leaf surfaces include numerous species of lichens, liverworts, and algae that colonize the upper surfaces of long-lived leaves, creating miniature ecosystems on what would seem to be inhospitable substrates. These leaf surface dwellers face challenges, including the short lifespan of individual leaves, the smooth and waxy surfaces that resist colonization, and the chemicals that many leaves produce as defenses. Yet epiphyllous communities persist on many canopy leaves, particularly in humid cloud forests, where moisture availability supports their growth. The presence of epiphyllae can reduce the host leaf's photosynthesis by shading it, creating costs for the tree that must be tolerated, because the tree apparently cannot prevent colonization without investing more in defense than the benefit would justify. Some epiphyllae fix nitrogen, potentially providing benefits to the host leaf if nitrogen is transferred from epiphyllae to leaf, though the extent of such nutrient transfer remains uncertain. The short lifespan of tropical leaves, often falling after just a few months or years, limits how large epiphyllae communities can become. This temporal limitation, preventing the heavy colonization that might seriously impair leaf function. The epiphyllae represent life, colonizing life. Organisms using other organisms as substrate in a layering that extends the habitat available for colonization beyond the inanimate structures of branches and trunks. Every surface, potentially becoming habitat for something. The principle of substrate exploitation being taken to extremes in the dense life of the canopy. The cloud forests that exist at high elevations or in areas where persistent clouds bathe the forest in fog represent an extreme form of rainforest, where moisture arrives primarily through cloud interception rather than through rainfall. The trees in cloud forests are often shorter than lowland rainforest trees, their growth apparently limited by the constant moisture and low light levels that characterize these perpetually misty environments. The leaves and branches drip constantly, water condensing from fog and running down surfaces. The forest essentially extracting water from clouds through the large surface area provided by vegetation. Epiphytes reach their greatest abundance and diversity in cloud forests. The constant moisture supporting mosses, liverworts, ferns, and other plants that cover every available surface, the trees appearing fuzzy or shaggy under their covering of epiphytic growth. The animal communities in cloud forests include species specialized for these cool, wet conditions, including salamanders and frogs that can thrive in the terrestrial portions of the forest because humidity remains so high that they never risk desiccation. The cloud forest canopy exists in a world of mist, where visibility is limited to tens of feet, where moisture saturates the air constantly, where the boundary between water and air becomes blurred. The forest breathing clouds, incorporating atmospheric water into its own substance, existing at the interface between gaseous and liquid phases. The clouds drift through the canopy like slow-moving rivers, their passage marked by the dripping of captured water, the forest serving as a kind of atmospheric mining operation, extracting water from air and channeling it towards soil and roots. The resistance of rainforest canopy trees to drought varies with wood anatomy and hydraulic architecture, with some species able to tolerate extended dry periods while others show stress after just days without water. The capacity to store water in the trunk or in specialized tissues allows some trees to buffer short-term droughts, drawing on these reserves to maintain leaf water status when soil water is unavailable. The depth of rooting influences drought tolerance, with deeper roots accessing moisture that remains available after surface layers dry. Though many canopy trees have relatively shallow roots, most of their root mass concentrated in the upper soil, where nutrients are most abundant. During extended droughts, some trees shed leaves to reduce water loss, sacrificing photosynthetic capacity to maintain water balance, a short-term survival strategy that comes with costs in terms of lost productivity. The recovery from drought depends on how severe and prolonged the water stress was, with mild stress having little lasting impact, while severe stress can damage the hydraulic system through cavitation, reducing the tree's ability to transport water even after rains return. Climate change projections suggest that many tropical forests will experience more frequent and severe droughts, creating concerns about how canopy tree communities will respond, with drought-sensitive species potentially declining, while drought-tolerant species increase, changing forest composition and possibly function. The trees stand rooted in place, unable to move to more favorable locations, committed to enduring whatever conditions occur, their survival depending on physiological tolerances that must encompass the range of conditions they experience. The canopy's future hanging on whether trees can tolerate conditions that may exceed their historical norms. The nitrogen fixation that occurs in the rainforest canopy, performed by bacteria living in symbiosis with certain tree species or as free-living organisms in epiphyte mats, contributes to the nitrogen budget of the forest. Despite most nitrogen fixation in terrestrial ecosystems occurring in soils, some canopy tree species host nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules, these trees belonging to the legume family or to other groups that have evolved this symbiosis, the bacteria converting atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia that the plant can use. The plant providing carbohydrates to support bacterial metabolism. The nitrogen fixed in the canopy becomes available to other organisms when leaves fall and decompose, or when nitrogen leaches from canopy soils and is absorbed by tree roots. This canopy-fixed nitrogen, potentially supplementing nitrogen availability throughout the forest. Free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria in decomposing organic matter may also contribute, though the importance of non-symbiotic fixation remains difficult to quantify. The presence of nitrogen fixers in the canopy represents an input of new nitrogen to the ecosystem, balancing losses through leaching and denitrification, maintaining the nitrogen capital that supports forest productivity. Nitrogen limitation affects many tropical forests, with plant growth being constrained by nitrogen availability. Despite the lush appearance suggesting unlimited resources, the canopy nitrogen fixers, helping to alleviate this limitation and supporting higher productivity than would occur without this input of new nitrogen. The lifespan of individual leaves in the rainforest canopy varies from months to years depending on species and environmental conditions, with leaves in high-light environments typically being replaced more frequently than leaves in shade, where the costs and benefits of leaf production differ. Short-lived leaves are often constructed with less investment in structural tissues and defenses, being relatively cheap to produce and replace, while long-lived leaves are tougher, more heavily defended, and more expensive to produce, representing different economic strategies for deploying photosynthetic tissue. The decision when to shed leaves involves complex trade-offs between the photosynthetic benefits of retaining leaves versus the costs of maintaining and defending aging leaves that become increasingly damaged by herbivores and pathogens as they age. Some trees shed leaves continuously throughout the year, maintaining a relatively constant canopy while constantly replacing individual leaves, while others shed all their leaves simultaneously, standing briefly bare before producing an entire new set of leaves. The nutrients in senescing leaves are often reabsorbed by the tree before the leaf falls, nitrogen and phosphorus being transported out of the leaf and into other tissues. This resorption, allowing nutrient conservation and reducing the tree's dependence on new nutrient uptake from soil. The fallen leaves contribute to the organic matter that accumulates on branches and in epiphyte masses, becoming substrate for decomposers and eventually releasing their remaining nutrients for recycling. The leaves pass through their life cycle from production to senescence to decomposition, each leaf existing temporarily as an individual photosynthetic unit before being reabsorbed into the collective metabolism of the forest, their substance recycled, their form temporary, but their function perpetual, as new leaves replace old ones in endless succession. The termites that build aerial nests in rainforest canopies construct elaborate structures from chewed wood and saliva, these carton nests protecting the colony from predators and from desiccation, while providing space for the fungus gardens that some termite species cultivate as food. The presence of termite nests alters local conditions on the branches where they're built, the nest material potentially providing nutrients when it decomposes, serving as substrate for epiphyte colonization and creating microhabitats that other organisms exploit. Some animals raid termite nests for food, breaking open the carton structure to access the termites inside, though the worker termite's soldier caste defends against such intrusions with powerful jaws or with chemical secretions that deter many potential predators. The termites process dead wood and other plant material, contributing to nutrient cycling in the canopy. By breaking down materials that would otherwise decompose more slowly, their activities accelerating the return of nutrients to forms available for plant uptake. The fungus gardens that some termite species maintain within their nests represent sophisticated agriculture. The termites collecting plant material, preparing it as substrate for fungal growth, maintaining conditions that favor their cultivated fungus over wild species, and harvesting the fungal biomass as their primary food source. These agricultural termites have co-evolved with their fungal partners, neither able to survive without the other, the relationship representing an obligate mutualism of remarkable complexity. The nest hangs on a branch like a natural sculpture, organic architecture, housing a society of millions of individuals working collectively toward the colony's survival and reproduction, their labors connecting them to the forest's nutrient cycles and to the complex web of ecological relationships that defines canopy ecology. The phenology of different tree species in the rainforest canopy creates a temporal mosaic of resource availability, with different species leafing, flowering, and fruiting at different times, ensuring that resources for herbivores, pollinators, and frugivores are available continuously rather than appearing in overwhelming abundance followed by scarcity. This asynchrony among species contrasts with the synchrony within species, where individuals of the same species often reproduce simultaneously. The combination of between-species asynchrony and within-species synchrony, creating a complex temporal structure to resource availability. Animals must track these phenological patterns, remembering which tree species produce fruit when traveling to particular locations at particular times to harvest resources as they become available, their movements and behaviors synchronized to the forest's phenological calendar. The evolutionary forces maintaining phenological diversity among species may include competition for pollinators and dispersers, with selection favoring species that reproduce when competitors are not reproducing, and when mutualist partners are available and not saturated with resources from other plant species. Climate change threatens to disrupt these phenological patterns, with different species potentially responding differently to changing temperature and rainfall regimes. The historical synchrony between plants and their pollinators or dispersers, possibly breaking down if climate change affects species differently. The canopy's temporal structure, built through evolutionary time, faces challenges from rapid environmental change, the delicate timing that coordinates ecological relationships, possibly being disrupted faster than evolution can establish new patterns. The spider webs that span gaps between branches in the rainforest canopy serve as insect traps, sticky silk capturing flying insects that blunder into these aerial nets, providing food for the spiders while reducing insect herbivory on plants by removing herbivorous insects from the canopy. The strategic placement of webs in flight corridors where insects travel frequently maximizes capture rates. Spiders learning through trial and error, or through inherited tendencies where to build for optimal success. The silk itself represents a remarkable material, stronger than steel by weight and capable of stretching significantly before breaking. These properties, allowing web construction from minimal material while providing structures capable of stopping flying insects without breaking under impact. Some webs are temporary, built fresh each night and consumed each morning, the spider recycling the silk proteins rather than wasting them, while other webs are more permanent structures that the spider repairs and maintains over extended periods. The architectural diversity of spider webs includes orb webs, sheet webs, tangle webs, and other forms, each design reflecting different strategies for capturing prey different species specializing in different web architectures suited to their particular niches. The webs add another layer of structure to the canopy. Gossamer lines connecting branches, creating barriers and pathways that influence where insects fly and where other animals move. The spiders, through their web-building activities, shaping the three-dimensional structure of the canopy in small but cumulative ways. The bromeliads that create water-filled cups in the canopy provide habitat for specialized aquatic communities, including mosquito larvae, frog tadpoles, and various aquatic invertebrates. These organisms living their entire lives in water bodies, containing less than a liter of water 50 feet above the ground. The water quality in bromeliad cups reflects inputs from rain, dust, decomposing organic matter, and the waste products of the aquatic inhabitants, creating chemically distinct environments that different species exploit in different ways. Some frog species breed exclusively in bromeliads, their tadpoles developing in these elevated pools. The adult frogs feeding on insects that emerge from the water, creating a complete life cycle confined to the canopy. The relationships among organisms in bromeliad communities include predation, competition, and mutualism, with some species depending on others to create conditions they require. The community dynamics, resembling those in larger bodies of water, despite the tiny volumes involved. The bromeliad benefits from the nutrients released by decomposition of organic matter that falls into its cup, and from the waste products of resident animals, these nutrients being absorbed by specialized scales on the leaf bases that line the cup, the plant's relationship with its residents being commensal or mutualistic rather than purely one-sided. The bromeliad pool exists as an isolated ecosystem, periodically connected to others through animal movements or through overflow during heavy rains, but mostly functioning as an island where species interact intensely within confined space. Their ecological relationships compressed into volumes that humans could hold in their hands. The miniaturization, creating opportunities for detailed study of community dynamics that would be impractical in larger systems. The camouflage strategies employed by canopy animals include color matching to blend with bark or leaves, disruptive coloration that breaks up body outline, and even architectural camouflage, where animals position themselves to appear as parts of the tree structure rather than as separate organisms. Some insects resemble leaves so precisely that distinguishing them from actual leaves requires close inspection, their bodies shaped and colored to mimic the veins, texture, and even the damage patterns of leaves, the resemblance serving to prevent detection by visually hunting predators. Other animals rely on countershading, with darker coloring on their backs and lighter coloring on their bellies. This pattern, counteracting the effects of lighting from above and making the animal appear flatter and less three-dimensional, reducing the visual cues that predators use to detect prey. Some species can change their coloration to match different backgrounds. This active color change requiring physiological mechanisms that adjust pigment distribution or structural color elements, the animal becoming a living display screen that matches its surroundings. The effectiveness of camouflage depends not just on the animal's appearance but on its behavior, remaining still being essential for avoiding detection, even perfect color matching, failing if movement betrays the animal's presence. The canopy becomes a visual puzzle where predators search for prey and prey attempt to remain invisible. An evolutionary arms race where detection and concealment drive the refinement of visual systems and camouflage patterns, the selective pressures creating remarkable adaptations on both sides of this perceptual game. The pollination ecology of canopy flowers involves complex relationships between plants and their animal pollinators, with different plant species attracting different pollinators through floral characteristics that serve as filters, admitting desired pollinators while excluding less effective visitors. The color of flowers signals to pollinators with appropriate color vision. Red flowers attracting birds, while pale flowers attract bats. The match between flower color and pollinator vision, creating channels of communication that competitors cannot easily eavesdrop on. The shape of flowers determines which pollinators can access nectar or pollen. With deep tubular flowers, accessible only to pollinators with long tongues or bills, while flat, open flowers can be visited by many pollinator types, the morphology serving as a lock that only certain keys can open. The timing of flower opening synchronizes with pollinator activity, day-flowering species attracting diurnal visitors, while night-blooming species serve nocturnal pollinators. The temporal separation, reducing competition among plant species for pollinator attention. The rewards that flowers offer, primarily nectar and pollen, must be sufficient to motivate visits, but not so abundant that pollinators can satisfy their needs from just a few flowers. The plant walking a tightrope between offering enough reward to attract pollinators while offering little enough that pollinators must visit many flowers, and in doing so, transfer pollen effectively. The chemical composition of nectar varies among species, with different sugar concentrations and different amino acid profiles, potentially appealing to different pollinators. This chemical variation, creating another dimension of specialization. The flowers bloom and attract their pollinators through signals and rewards. The pollinators visit and carry pollen, the relationship sustained through mutual benefit, each side evolving in response to the other, the interaction refined through generations into partnerships of remarkable specificity. The seed dispersal mechanisms in the rainforest canopy include explosive pods that fling seeds away from the parent tree, wind-dispersed seeds with wings or parachutes that carry them horizontally through the canopy before descending, and the animal-dispersed seeds packaged in fruits that attract vertebrate dispersers. The explosive dispersal mechanism involves pods that dry and build tension until they suddenly split, the elastic energy accumulated during drying being released to propel seeds meters away from the parent. This ballistic dispersal, achieving modest distances, but requiring no reliance on animals or wind. Wind-dispersed seeds must be light enough to remain airborne despite their fall velocity, their wings or plumes providing drag that slows descent, allowing horizontal winds to carry them away from the parent tree before they reach the ground. The distances achieved through wind dispersal in forests are typically modest compared to open habitats, because the forest structure blocks wind, and because seeds falling from the canopy must traverse the vertical distance through relatively calm air beneath the canopy, though emergent trees launching seeds from above the main canopy may achieve greater dispersal distances. Animal dispersers provide directed dispersal, carrying seeds to specific locations rather than simply moving them randomly, with some dispersers caching seeds in locations favorable for germination, others depositing them in cleared areas where competition is reduced, the animals inadvertently serving the plant's reproductive interests while pursuing their own nutritional needs. The diversity of dispersal mechanisms reflects the diversity of solutions to the fundamental problem of moving offspring away from the parent, each mechanism having advantages and disadvantages that create selective pressures, favoring particular strategies in particular ecological contexts. The seeds travel through the canopy and beyond, carrying genetic information from parent to landing site, their journeys determining where the next generation will attempt to establish. The spatial patterns of forest trees reflecting the accumulated history of billions of seed dispersal events. The vertical structure of the rainforest canopy influences wind flow patterns, with the roughness of the upper canopy creating turbulence that extends upward into the atmosphere above the forest and downward into the canopy itself. This turbulent mixing brings carbon dioxide from the atmosphere down to the canopy, where leaves need it for photosynthesis, while carrying water vapor and heat from the canopy upward into the atmosphere, where they influence cloud formation and regional climate. The momentum of wind is absorbed by the canopy through drag on leaves and branches, the forest acting as a brake on atmospheric motion, converting wind's kinetic energy into heat through friction. Within the canopy, wind speed decreases exponentially with depth, the densest parts of the canopy creating the greatest drag, air movement becoming negligible near the forest floor in intact forests. This wind gradient influences seed dispersal, pollination, and the distribution of airborne spores and insects with organisms adapted to different wind environments, sorting themselves vertically through the canopy based on their dispersal requirements. The forest canopy generates its own atmospheric boundary layer, a zone where the presence of vegetation modifies all atmospheric properties, including temperature, humidity, and wind. This modified atmosphere, extending upward for hundreds or thousands of feet, depending on atmospheric conditions. The canopy breathes, exchanging gases with the atmosphere, its roughness stirring the air, its transpiration adding moisture, its photosynthesis removing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, the forest serving as a lung for the planet, mediating exchanges between biosphere and atmosphere. The growth rate of rainforest canopy trees varies dramatically among species and with tree size, with fast-growing pioneer species potentially adding several feet of height per year when young, while slow-growing shade-tolerant species may grow only inches per year even under favorable conditions. This growth rate variation reflects different life history strategies. Pioneers investing heavily in rapid growth to claim space in canopy gaps, accepting the costs of producing wood with less density and durability, while shade-tolerant species invest in dense, durable wood that resists pathogens and mechanical damage, growing slowly but potentially living centuries. The transition from shade-suppressed sapling to canopy-dominant tree often involves waiting for a gap to open, the tree spending decades in the understory growing slowly, then accelerating growth dramatically when light becomes available through the death of a canopy tree. The age at which trees reach reproductive maturity varies with growth rate and size, with some pioneer species flowering within years of germination, while still relatively small, while large canopy trees may not reproduce until they are decades old and have achieved canopy position. The wood produced during rapid growth differs structurally from wood produced during slow growth. The growth rings, when present, containing information about the tree's history, periods of rapid growth, following gap formation visible as wide rings, periods of suppression visible as narrow rings. The trees grow according to their own schedules, some racing toward the canopy, others waiting patiently for their opportunity, each strategy succeeding in its appropriate context, the forest containing the full range from explosive growth to barely perceptible expansion. All these strategies coexisting and together creating the temporal dynamics of forest structure. The light quality in the rainforest canopy changes not just in intensity, but in spectral composition, as light passes through leaves, with chlorophyll absorbing red and blue light preferentially, allowing green light to pass through or be reflected. This means that light in the lower canopy, having passed through multiple leaf layers, is enriched in green wavelengths and depleted in the red and blue wavelengths that plants use most efficiently for photosynthesis. Some shade-adapted plants have evolved to use green light more efficiently, adjusting their photosynthetic pigments to capture wavelengths that sun-adapted plants largely ignore. This spectral niche differentiation allowing coexistence by reducing competition for light. The daily variation in light quality occurs as the sun angle changes throughout the day. Morning and evening light arriving at oblique angles that increase its path length through the atmosphere and through the canopy, shifting the spectrum toward longer wavelengths. On cloudy days, diffuse light penetrates the canopy more uniformly than direct sunlight, the scattering by clouds, creating a more even light distribution that can actually increase photosynthesis in the lower canopy, despite reduced overall light intensity. The temporal and spatial variation in light quality creates a complex optical environment where plants must cope not just with varying light intensity, but with varying wavelength distribution, their photosynthetic machinery adjusting to extract energy efficiently across different spectral conditions. The light filters through the canopy like water, through layers of colored glass, each leaf changing its properties slightly, the cumulative effect creating the green twilight of the forest interior, a world bathed in light, but light transformed. Second-hand photons carrying less energy than the direct sunlight that strikes the uppermost leaves. The hydraulic redistribution that occurs when tree roots move water from moist, deep soil to dry, shallow soil during night, releasing this water into the upper soil layers where it becomes available to other plants, represents a form of facilitation where trees inadvertently benefit their neighbors. This water movement occurs passively along water potential gradients. The tree's root system serving as a conduit, connecting different soil layers, water flowing from areas of high water potential to areas of low water potential without requiring active pumping. The water released into dry surface soils can be substantial, equivalent to a light rain. This hydraulic lift potentially explaining how some understory plants survive dry seasons despite their shallow roots. The phenomenon only became widely recognized in recent decades. Despite probably being common, the nocturnal movement of water through root systems being difficult to observe directly and initially seeming counterintuitive, given that plants are generally seen as extracting water from soil rather than releasing it. The ecological implications remain under investigation, with questions about how much hydraulic redistribution affects plant community composition and ecosystem function, whether plants have evolved to exploit water released by neighbors, and how the phenomenon influences the ecosystem water balance. The trees stand as living pumps, circulating water through the soil, connecting moist and dry zones. Their root systems creating networks through which water flows in patterns more complex than simple uptake. The apparently straightforward process of water acquisition revealing unexpected complexity when examined closely. The forest's hydrology, containing subtleties that continued research gradually illuminates. The carbon storage in rainforest canopy trees represents a significant portion of the terrestrial carbon pool, with each large tree containing tons of carbon captured from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and incorporated into wood, bark, and leaves. This stored carbon remains out of the atmosphere as long as the tree lives, and as long as its wood remains undecayed after death, making forests important carbon sinks that slow the accumulation of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The rate of carbon accumulation in tropical forests, once thought to be at equilibrium with carbon release through decomposition and disturbance, now appears to show net uptake in many regions, though the reasons for this uptake and whether it will continue remain subjects of research and debate. Deforestation releases this stored carbon back to the atmosphere through burning or decomposition, converting centuries of accumulated carbon to carbon dioxide over months or years. The destruction of forests, thus contributing significantly to atmospheric carbon dioxide increases. Reforestation can recapture carbon, but restoring the carbon storage of old-growth forests requires decades to centuries. The time lag between forest destruction and forest regrowth, meaning that deforestation creates a carbon debt that takes generations to repay. The carbon cycle in the canopy operates over multiple timescales, from the hourly cycles of photosynthesis and respiration, to the century-scale accumulation in tree trunks, to the millennial-scale processes of soil carbon formation, the canopy serving as both rapid exchanger and long-term storage of carbon. The atoms of carbon move through the forest in countless pathways, captured from air, built into living tissue, respired back to air, consumed and incorporated into animal bodies, these individual atoms cycling while the pool sizes change. The canopy containing carbon that may have cycled through many previous generations of organisms, recycled endlessly, while pools shift and atmospheric concentrations change. The communication between trees through chemical signals released when herbivores attack, warning neighboring trees to increase their defenses before they are attacked themselves, represents a form of information transfer that challenges traditional views of plants as passive organisms. The damaged tree releases volatile organic compounds that travel through the air to neighboring trees. These chemical messages being detected by leaf surfaces that respond by increasing production of defensive compounds or by other physiological changes that reduce herbivore success. The evolutionary explanation for this apparent altruism remains debated, with possibilities including that the signaling tree benefits if its neighbors increase defenses, reduce the overall herbivore population, or that the signals actually evolved as cues that the signaling tree itself uses, with neighbors eavesdropping on signals intended for the signaler's own distant branches. The chemicals travel on wind currents through the canopy, creating plumes of signal molecules that provide information about herbivore presence and identity. Different herbivores, eliciting different chemical signals that allow plants to tailor their responses to specific threats. The signals can also attract predators of the herbivores, carnivorous insects being drawn to the chemical signatures of damaged plants, arriving to consume the herbivores and inadvertently providing the plant with defensive services. This chemical landscape of warning signals and attractive cues creates an informational dimension to the canopy. Molecules carrying meaning, their presence influencing the behavior and physiology of organisms that detect them, the canopy becoming not just a physical structure, but a chemical communication network where information flows between organisms in molecular form. The role of rainforest canopies in the global water cycle extends beyond local recycling of rainfall to include the production of organic aerosols that serve as cloud condensation nuclei. These particles enabling cloud formation that influences rainfall patterns regionally and potentially globally. The forest produces volatile organic compounds that react in the atmosphere to form small particles. These particles growing through condensation and coagulation until they reach sizes where water vapor can condense on them, each particle potentially becoming the center of a cloud droplet. The quantity of particles produced by intact forests exceeds that from disturbed or converted landscapes, suggesting that deforestation may reduce cloud formation and rainfall, creating feedback loops where forest loss reduces rainfall, which stresses remaining forests and may contribute to further forest loss. The moisture that forests return to the atmosphere through transpiration, which can exceed the moisture received as rain because forests recycle water multiple times as it falls, flows downwind, rains again, is transpired again, and continues this cycle until it eventually reaches the ocean or is deposited far from its origin. Some regions receive significant portions of their rainfall from moisture transpired by forests upwind, creating atmospheric rivers of water that connect forests across vast distances. The health of forests in one region influencing rainfall in distant regions downwind. The canopy serves as an interface between land and atmosphere, mediating exchanges of water and particles that influence climate at scales from local to continental. The forest's influence extending far beyond its physical boundaries through the atmosphere, making the canopy a component of the global climate system, whose importance exceeds what its geographic extent alone would suggest. The resilience of rainforest canopies to disturbance depends on the type, intensity, and frequency of disturbance, with forests showing remarkable capacity to recover from single events like storms or isolated tree falls, but potentially shifting to alternative states if disturbances are too frequent or too severe. Small-scale disturbances create the gap dynamics that maintain forest diversity. These gaps being filled through succession processes that have operated throughout the forest's history. The forest, possessing mechanisms that allow recovery because similar disturbances have occurred countless times before. Large-scale disturbances that affect substantial portions of forest simultaneously, such as severe droughts or extensive fires, may exceed the forest's capacity for recovery, particularly if they occur before the forest has recovered from previous disturbances. The accumulated stress preventing normal successional processes from operating. The seed banks in soil and the stumps that resprout after disturbance provide sources of regeneration. But these resources can be depleted if disturbances are too frequent, leaving no source of forest species to recolonize disturbed areas. Human activities that increase disturbance frequency or that remove regeneration sources can push forests past tipping points, beyond which forest recovery becomes unlikely, the landscape converting to grassland or scrub vegetation that resists forest re-establishment through different ecological processes. The canopy's apparent stability masks underlying dynamics of constant change and recovery. the forest persisting not through unchanging permanence, but through continuous processes of damage and repair, death and regeneration. The resilience residing not in any single component, but in the processes that allow the forest to reorganize after disturbance while maintaining its fundamental character. The acoustic ecology of the rainforest canopy includes not just the sounds animals produce, but the ways that forest structure influences sound propagation, with the complex three-dimensional arrangement of leaves and branches creating acoustic properties different from open environments. Sound waves scatter off vegetation, creating reverberation that can extend the duration of sounds, but that also reduces the distance over which sounds remain intelligible. The forest, imposing trade-offs on acoustic communication, similar to the trade-offs faced by visual signals in environments with limited sightlines. Different frequencies propagate differently through vegetation, with lower frequencies generally traveling farther than higher frequencies, leading to frequency-dependent communication ranges that animals must consider when choosing the frequencies at which to vocalize. The dawn chorus. When many bird species vocalize simultaneously in the early morning, creates acoustic competition where species must either call louder, call at different frequencies, or call at slightly different times to avoid being masked by heterospecific calls. Some animals produce calls specifically structured to propagate well through forest vegetation, with frequency-modulated calls or calls with redundant elements increasing the probability that the signal reaches receivers despite degradation during transmission. The canopy absorbs some frequencies more than others, filtering sounds in ways that create acoustic niches, analogous to the spectral niches plants occupy in the light environment, the forest shaping sound as thoroughly as it shapes light, creating an acoustic landscape as complex as the visual landscape that we more readily perceive. The microclimate within epiphyte masses differs from conditions on bare branches, with the accumulated organic matter retaining moisture, moderating temperature, and creating soil-like substrate, where organisms normally associated with the forest floor can survive high in the canopy. These suspended soils, created through accumulation of decaying leaves, dead epiphytes, dust, and other organic matter, can be surprisingly thick, sometimes reaching depths of several inches, providing root space equivalent to ground soil. The organisms living within these canopy soils include earthworms, millipedes, ants, and numerous other invertebrates that process organic matter and contribute to nutrient cycling in ways similar to their counterparts in ground soil. The moisture content of epiphyte mats varies with rain and humidity, these organic masses acting as sponges that absorb water during rain and release it gradually through evaporation and through uptake by plant roots, buffering the moisture availability in ways that allow less drought-tolerant species to survive in the canopy. The temperature within thick epiphyte mats remains more stable than on exposed branch surfaces. The insulating properties of organic matter, reducing temperature fluctuations and creating thermal refuges for organisms sensitive to extreme temperatures. The epiphyte masses represent habitat creation by plants, the accumulated results of countless epiphyte individuals over decades, creating substrate where substrate would not otherwise exist, the forest extending its influence vertically through biological processes that manufacture soil in the air, gravity-defying deposits of organic matter, supporting communities that blur the distinctions between terrestrial and arboreal life. The effects of fragmentation on rainforest canopies extend beyond simple habitat loss to include edge effects, where the microclimate near forest edges differs from interior conditions, with higher temperatures, lower humidity, more light, and stronger winds penetrating into forest edges and altering conditions for tens or hundreds of feet into the forest. These edge effects increase proportionally as fragment size decreases. Small fragments having proportionally more edge and less interior, potentially lacking true forest interior conditions entirely, if the fragment is small enough. The changed conditions near edges favor different species than those found in forest interiors. Edge-adapted species replacing interior specialists, reducing the overall biodiversity that fragments can support, despite apparently maintaining forest cover. The increased light and altered moisture regimes near edges can increase tree mortality, particularly of large canopy trees that evolved for interior conditions, leading to further degradation, as dead trees create gaps that extend edge effects deeper into the fragment. The movement of animals between fragments becomes more difficult, as fragments become more isolated, populations in small fragments eventually losing genetic diversity through inbreeding and becoming vulnerable to local extinction through demographic stochasticity. The forest canopy in fragments persists visually but functions differently than continuous forest canopy. The ecological processes operating in altered ways, the fragment being less than it appears, its canopy covering but not fully supporting the diversity that requires interior conditions and landscape connectivity to persist across evolutionary time. The defense compounds that plants produce to deter herbivores include an enormous diversity of molecules, from alkaloids that interfere with nervous system function, to tannins that bind proteins and reduce digestibility, to compounds that mimic insect hormones and disrupt development. The diversity of these compounds reflects the diversity of herbivores and the evolutionary arms race between plants and the organisms that consume them, each plant lineage evolving its own chemical arsenal, while herbivores evolve detoxification mechanisms and other countermeasures. Some compounds are produced constitutively, present in tissues at all times, providing constant defense, but requiring continuous investment of resources, while others are induced, produced only after damage occurs, conserving resources when herbivores are absent, but requiring time to take effect after attack begins. The effectiveness of defenses varies with herbivore identity. Compounds that deter some herbivores being ineffective against others that have evolved specific detoxification mechanisms, creating opportunities for specialist herbivores that concentrate on plants whose defenses they can overcome. The spatial distribution of defensive compounds within plants often concentrates defenses in young leaves that are most valuable and most vulnerable, while older leaves receive less protection, the plant allocating defenses to maximize their benefit given limited resources. The chemical warfare between plants and herbivores plays out continually in the canopy. Invisible battles where molecules attack and counterattack, both sides evolving in response to the other. The outcome of individual encounters, determining which organisms reproduce and which adaptations spread through populations. The forest, serving as arena for co-evolutionary dynamics that shape the characteristics of both attackers and defenders. The vertical migration of nutrients through litter, fall and throughfall creates connections between canopy and soil, with materials produced in the canopy descending through various pathways to the forest floor, where they undergo further decomposition and nutrient release. The litter fall, consisting of dead leaves, flowers, fruits, branches, and other plant parts, represents a rain of organic matter that provides the primary input of nutrients to the soil. The continuous shower of debris linking canopy productivity to soil processes. The throughfall, rain that passes through the canopy and carries dissolved nutrients, leached from leaves and organic matter, adds nutrients to soil water more quickly than litter decomposition, providing a fast pathway for nutrient movement from canopy to roots. The stem flow, water running down tree trunks, concentrates nutrients in the area immediately around trunk bases, creating hotspots of nutrient availability that certain plants may preferentially occupy. The balance between nutrient retention in the canopy through rapid recycling and nutrient loss to the soil through litterfall and throughfall influences overall ecosystem nutrient budgets, with forests on nutrient-poor soils showing tighter canopy cycling and less nutrient loss than forests on richer soils where nutrients can be replaced more easily. The vertical connections allow nutrients to cycle through the system repeatedly, captured by canopy plants, incorporated into tissues, released through decomposition or leaching, taken up by roots, transported to canopy, the circuit repeating. The forest operating as a nutrient recycling system, whose efficiency allows high productivity despite often limited nutrient availability in tropical soils. The symbiotic relationships in the rainforest canopy extend beyond plant pollinator and plant disperser mutualisms to include ant-plant mutualisms, where certain tree species provide specialized housing and food for ants that defend the plant against herbivores. These myrmecophytes produce hollow structures that serve as ant nest sites, often with specialized entrance holes that allow ants easy access, and produce food bodies, or extrafloral nectaries, that provide ants with nutrition. The resident ants patrol the plant surface, attacking and removing herbivorous insects, and in some cases even destroying climbing vines that might compete with the host plant for light. The specificity of these relationships varies, with some plant species hosting only one ant species, while others are colonized by various ant species. Opportunistically, the degree of coevolution between partners differing among systems. The benefits to both partners appear clear in many cases, with ant-occupied plants showing reduced herbivory and faster growth compared to unoccupied plants, while ants gain secure nest sites and reliable food sources, though some systems show more asymmetry, with one partner benefiting more than the other. The presence of ant plants adds another dimension to canopy ecology, creating inhabited structures that serve as micro-ecosystems. The hollow chambers, housing not just ants, but also the organisms associated with ant colonies, creating communities within communities, biological Russian dolls, where each level of organization contains another level within it. The regeneration strategies of canopy trees include both colonization of large gaps, where conditions favor fast-growing pioneers, and gradual replacement within the canopy, where shade-tolerant species grow slowly beneath established trees, ready to fill openings when canopy trees die. Pioneer species produce small seeds in large numbers, these seeds dispersing widely and remaining viable in the soil seed bank for years or decades, waiting for gap formation to trigger germination. The pioneers grow rapidly when gaps form, their fast growth allowing them to claim space before competitors arrive, though this rapid growth comes at costs, including short lifespan and susceptibility to pathogens and wind damage. Shade-tolerant species produce larger seeds in smaller numbers, these seeds containing more resources to support seedling establishment in shade. The seedlings growing slowly but steadily without requiring high light. The mixture of regeneration strategies maintains forest diversity, with different species succeeding under different disturbance regimes and different light conditions. The forest-containing species spanning a continuum from extreme pioneers, requiring high light, to extreme shade-tolerant species that can establish and grow under intact canopy. The strategy each species employs reflects its evolutionary history and the environments its ancestors encountered. Natural selection, favoring traits that increase survival and reproduction under the historical range of conditions. These adaptations, determining current ecological roles and responses to environmental change. The biodiversity of rainforest canopies, estimated to include over half of all terrestrial species, despite canopies occupying a small fraction of Earth's land surface, remains poorly quantified because many canopy organisms have never been described by science. The difficulty of accessing canopies hampered research for decades, with early naturalists limited to studying organisms that could be collected from the ground using various tools or that came down from the canopy voluntarily. Modern techniques including canopy towers, walkways, and climbing systems have improved access but remain labor-intensive and expensive, limiting the spatial and temporal coverage of canopy studies. The high diversity reflects multiple factors, including the three-dimensional structural complexity that creates many microhabitats, the high primary productivity that supports long food chains and many herbivore species, and the climatic stability that has allowed specialization and fine-scale niche partitioning. The actual number of species living in rainforest canopies remains uncertain, with estimates ranging from millions to tens of millions. The ranges reflecting both uncertainty about how many species exist and definitional questions about what constitutes separate species. Each new survey of canopy arthropods typically finds species previously unknown to science, suggesting that comprehensive inventories of canopy biodiversity remain far from complete. The forest canopy, representing one of Earth's last biological frontiers, where basic descriptive work remains to be done, and where major discoveries await future researchers with the tools and dedication to study these elevated ecosystems. The historical changes in rainforest canopies over geological time include periods when tropical forests expanded during warm, wet periods and contracted during cold, dry periods, with past forests differing in species composition even when occupying similar geographic areas. Ice Age forests contracted toward equatorial refugia, while temperate forests expanded toward the tropics, then expanded again during warm interglacial periods, these cycles of contraction and expansion occurring repeatedly over millions of years. The species composition of modern rainforests reflects these historical dynamics, with areas that maintained forest during dry periods, serving as sources for recolonization during subsequent wet periods, creating geographic patterns of diversity that reflect not just current conditions but historical refugia and dispersal routes. Some canopy tree lineages are ancient, having existed for tens of millions of years through multiple cycles of climate change, while other lineages are more recent, their current distributions reflecting relatively recent dispersal and diversification. The rate of species turnover through evolutionary time remains debated, with some periods apparently showing rapid diversification, while others show relative stasis. The factors controlling these rates, including climate change, geographic isolation, and intrinsic properties of organisms that influence speciation rates. Understanding the historical dynamics of rainforest canopies provides context for current conservation challenges, revealing that forests have always changed, but that current changes differ in being driven by human activities, operating at rates and scales unprecedented in the forest's evolutionary history. The modern forest canopy, existing at a moment when its future depends on decisions made by organisms that did not evolve within the forest system. The ethical dimensions of rainforest conservation include questions about the value of biodiversity that humans may never use or even know exists, about the rights of indigenous peoples whose territories overlap with forests targeted for conservation, and about the responsibilities of developed nations whose past development depended on resource extraction, now being prevented in developing nations. The argument for conservation based on potential future use of undiscovered species, the so-called option value, suggests that maintaining diversity preserves options for future generations who may find uses for species that currently seem valueless. The existence value argument holds that species have value simply through existing, independent of any use, this position reflecting ethical frameworks that extend moral consideration beyond humans to other organisms and to ecosystems as entities worthy of preservation. The indigenous peoples living in and depending on rainforests have participated in forest ecology for millennia, their activities having shaped current forest composition in ways that challenge narratives of pristine wilderness, unaffected by humans. The opportunity costs of forest conservation fall disproportionately on people living near forests, who might otherwise convert forest to other land uses, creating tensions between local economic development and global conservation goals that require careful negotiation and potentially compensation mechanisms. The canopy exists within these human contexts, its future determined not by ecological processes alone, but by human decisions, influenced by economics, ethics, politics, and values. The trees growing in soil, but their persistence depending on the cultivation of human attitudes and institutions that support their protection. The educational value of rainforest canopies as systems for studying ecology, evolution, and biodiversity provides rationale for their preservation beyond direct economic or ecosystem service arguments, with canopies serving as natural laboratories where fundamental biological processes can be studied in the contexts where they evolved. The complexity of canopy ecosystems challenges researchers to develop new theories and methods, driving scientific progress in fields from biomechanics to chemical ecology to community ecology. Students studying canopy systems learn about adaptation, interaction, and complexity through examples that often prove more engaging than abstract presentations of ecological principles, the canopy providing concrete illustrations of concepts that might otherwise remain abstract. The long-term research sites that exist in some tropical forests provide opportunities to study processes operating over decades, these temporal perspectives being essential for understanding systems where tree lifespans span centuries and where climate variations occur on multi-decadal cycles. The discoveries that emerge from canopy research include findings relevant far beyond tropical forests, insights about plant physiology, animal behavior, or ecosystem function that apply broadly across biomes and that inform management decisions in various contexts. The canopy teaches those who study it, revealing principles of organization and function that emerge through evolution rather than through design, natural experiments that illuminate how living systems work and how they respond to change. The forest, serving as both subject and teacher for scientists seeking to understand life's complexity. The future trajectories of rainforest canopies depend on multiple factors, including climate change, continued deforestation and fragmentation, hunting pressure on seed dispersers and pollinators, and the effectiveness of conservation efforts at local to international scales. Climate models project increasing temperatures and changing precipitation patterns in many tropical regions, these changes potentially exceeding the tolerance ranges of some canopy species while favoring others, altering forest composition and potentially reducing forest cover where conditions become too dry to support closed canopy forest. The synergistic effects of multiple stressors may exceed the sum of individual stresses, with fragmentation making forests more vulnerable to drought, reduced seed dispersal preventing forest regeneration, and climate change pushing species toward range shifts that fragmentation prevents. These interacting pressures potentially driving systems toward tipping points where forest converts to non-forest vegetation states. The potential for technological solutions, including artificial reforestation or climate manipulation, remains speculative, with restoration of old-growth canopy structure requiring timescales that exceed human attention spans and possibly exceeding windows of opportunity if climate changes faster than restoration can proceed. The conservation successes that have occurred, demonstrating that forest protection is possible when sufficient will and resources are mobilized, provide hope, but also highlight the challenges of sustaining conservation efforts over the long term required for forest persistence. The canopy's future remains unwritten, its trajectory determined by decisions not yet made, by climate responses not yet clear, by ecological resilience whose limits remain unknown. The forest, existing in a present moment that looks toward uncertain futures. The outcome, depending on whether humanity chooses and manages to preserve these extraordinary ecosystems through the challenges ahead. And now the canopy fades behind your thoughts. We've drifted through 100 quiet truths about the rainforest treetops, from the layers of leaves filtering sunlight to the creatures that live their entire lives without touching ground, from the hanging gardens of epiphytes to the complex conversations plants hold through chemical signals drifting on humid air. You are connected to this world. The oxygen in your lungs came from leaves like these, released through the same photosynthesis we've explored tonight. The carbon in your body cycled through forests before becoming you. The complexity you contain mirrors the complexity we've witnessed in the canopy. Systems within systems, connections within connections. Life supporting life in patterns too intricate to fully comprehend, but beautiful to contemplate. Tonight, as you rest, the rainforest canopy continues its ancient rhythms 100 feet above the forest floor, leaves capturing starlight and moonlight, epiphytes holding water in their cups, insects moving through darkness, flowers opening for night pollinators. The canopy breathes, grows, cycles nutrients, creates weather, supports life, all without awareness that we observe and wonder. And you are safe, warm, resting in a world where forests still stand, where canopies still stretch green toward the sky, where life weaves itself into patterns of impossible beauty and complexity. If you're still awake, go ahead and watch the next chapter. Sleep well and dream softly. Good night.